welcome to Era's Bookshelf, and thank you for your time, Mr. Robertson.
Thank you for having me.
Mm-hmm. Can you start by introducing yourself, telling us a bit about your background and what inspired you to become a writer?
Yeah, so my name's Dave, and I am an author who lives in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Treaty One territory. I've been writing professionally for about 14 years now.
Oh, it's
I,
a long time.
yeah, long time. I've had about 30 or so books published, most of them for children. And I started writing when I was about 8 years old. So I was pretty young when I decided I wanted to be a writer. Actually, I think it's the only thing I've ever wanted to be is a writer. And so getting published when I was about 32 was a dream come true. And almost all my books are for kids. So I think there's only 3 books for adults. So this is it's always special to talk to kids and to visit schools. That's a big part of my job now too. But I have 5 kids of my own too. So yeah.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Well, that's actually a very long time. And funny thing is, I'm just 8 years old, and I've already started writing a few drafts of my own.
Hey, well, that's when it starts. 8 years old.
Mm-hmm.
You're the same. You're the same age that I was when I started. Yep, that's awesome.
Mm-hmm. What inspired you to write the song that called them home?
Well, being from a Cree background, being Indigenous, all of my books have been about Indigenous people, history or issues today or traditional stories that I've really loved. And so I've always wanted to write about little people. And so in Cree culture and a lot of Indigenous cultures, and actually a lot of the cultures across the globe, there's stories of little people. And my dad actually had an encounter with little people when he was a boy living on the Trapline. And so that was one of the big inspirations for me in writing this story, was just thinking about how my dad saw these little creatures. And I also wanted to almost like pay tribute to one of my favorite books of all time, which is called Outside Over There by Maurice Sendak.
Mm-hmm.
And so I kind of just blended that together with this love of traditional stories and figures in traditional stories like Little People, and just made it into this kind of adventure portal story called The Song That Called Them Home.
Mm-hmm. I think that is a lovely way that it seems a very nice way to write books, and I really appreciate that you're doing this for children and little people.
Yeah, no, I love writing for kids, and I love sharing parts of my own culture with a lot of people, because I feel like stories can teach us so much about each other, and the more we can learn about each other and our traditions and our stories and our ways of living and values, I think is so important. And we do so much of that through storytelling. And little people are they're such fun little creatures, and they're fun little stories about them. So adding this story into the many stories about them was something that I thought was a really cool thing to do.
Mm-hmm. Well, it seems very nice that you think that way, and I well, I myself have been trying to do that.
What kind of stories have you been writing?
Well, it's sort of like a fantasy novel,
I love fantasy.
but
That's
I
a good
haven't got any
choice.
of them published yet.
Well, you've got a lot of time left, so I think one day you're gonna get there.
Thank you. How did you come up with the title? I know that technically it is the song that called them home, but I wouldn't have thought of that. And well, tell me more.
Well, the titles are so important, and sometimes they come to you right away. So, my first picture book, called When We Were Alone, was that title kind of came first, and then I built the whole story around the title. And then sometimes they're really a lot harder to capture the titles. Like a book like The Barren Grounds was a title we thought of very late, and we actually had a different title for it initially. I think that for the song that called them home, I had that title very early on, and it helped me to write the story because it helped me to focus the story on the title, and it kind of helped as an anchor point for the story. So it helped me kind of like anchor everything to the title, because the concept of it was always, what is home? How do we find home? How are we called home? And so that's a really big theme of the book. And so the title was something I was able to build the story around from the very start, I think.
Mm-hmm. Well, I suppose that's actually a really nice way to write a book. And sometimes I think of titles and then I don't know what the story's going to be about.
Yeah,
What
I know how you feel.
yeah. Yeah, one time I thought of Nilla cookies for a title because I was eating them for a snack, and I have no clue what the book would be about if it was a book.
But sometimes if you give yourself time and you don't force yourself, the idea might just come to you one day when you're not even expecting it, and then you can use that idea to match your title. When I was at your age, I had a book that I wrote called Tarts for Jack, and I didn't know really what it was about at first, and then eventually I thought, well, Jack really wants some tarts. So let's put some obstacles in front of him and figure out how he's going to get tarts, even though it's really hard to get them. And that became the plot for actually the second book I wrote when I was in grade 3, the little picture book called Tarts for Jack. So don't
Mm-hmm.
give up.
I won't. Uh-huh. And what are the meme que wesewak? Is that how you pronounce it?
Memaguichiwak, yeah. So those are the little people, and what they are is, I mean, there's lots of different ways to describe them, but they're little humanoid creatures. And so in some stories they have noses, and some stories they have no noses. And in some stories they're very kind of like mischievous. In some stories they can be kind of a little bit mean, especially to older people. But they're always nice to children, and they're always kind of protective of children, and they always want to play with children. So the stories about them are really they're really fun, and they're really really beautiful stories.
Uh-huh.
And to me they're all about just like playfulness and the joy of youth, and just having fun and being a little bit mischievous.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can certainly see that they want to play in this book.
Yeah, they do want to play. They kind of want to play a bit too much, I think.
When there are safety concerns when it comes to playing.
Yeah, there is a safety concern in this book, but I think if I remember correctly, we ended up putting life jackets in the story just so people knew that we were being a little bit safe, even though they were playing out
Yeah.
in a canoe, out in a canoe.
Uh-huh. Where did you get the idea for the song?
Well, I've loved the rhythm of traditional songs for a long time. Just like the drum beat and how it makes me feel like a heartbeat. And so that heartbeat and that feeling of safety and comfort from hearing your heartbeat in rhythm is something that I really, really liked. And so I tried to use that rhythm in my head as I created lyrics for both of the songs. And so they're both songs that I wrote for the book. And I just used some other traditional songs that I really, really loved in terms of their rhythm. And I constructed new lyrics for some of those songs. What I love about having the songs in the books is that people will be able to sing them in their own way. And I think that's really cool too, how art is really in the eye of the beholder. And so
Mhm.
you might sing it in a different way than I would sing it, and you would probably sing it better because I'm actually a really bad singer.
Well, I wouldn't really sing it. I usually just imagine it.
That's a good way to do it too.
Mm-hmm. Are there any things that happened in your own life that influenced into the book?
Not I wish there was because I would love to see something like supernatural like Little People. I'm really the closest thing is my dad's story about them. And my dad was just on the trapline one day as a little boy, and he saw this little canoe coming towards him. And the canoe, as it got closer, did not get any bigger. And he realized that it was little people in the canoe that were passing by the trapline on the river. And then they kind of disappeared into a waterfall. And so that story that my dad told me was the closest I've ever been to Little People. And so I think that like part of it was like wanting to recapture some boyish wonder of wanting to see something that when I was a kid, and maybe living through my dad and he really did see as a kid. But I really haven't seen anything supernatural like that in my own life. So I think that for me it was mostly that, and just being inspired by Maurice Sendak's book Outside Over There, which was a big inspiration for the structure of the story.
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, that sounds very similar to the book because in the illustrations it does show that they went to a waterfall.
Yeah, they did go to a waterfall, and that's like the stories behind them are that they live behind waterfalls or they live between rocks. They live in very hard to reach places in their other in where they live, which is usually like through little portals that we really can't get to. And I always like the idea of portals, and I've written a lot about portals lately. And so this is just like one of a few portal stories I've
Mm.
written. And they're a lot of fun to write.
What other portal stories have you written?
Well, the Misawa Saga is this fantasy middle grade series I've been working on for the last little while. I'm working on book 5 of that series right now, and that's all a portal story. And then I have the song that called them home, which is a portal story. And I have a couple more portal stories that I'm starting to write right now. But I don't want to overdo it. So I think like once I'm done the next one or two, I might not write another portal story for a little while because I don't want to get people too bored of all the portal stories I'm writing.
Well, as long as they go to new places, I don't think I would ever get bored.
Well, I appreciate that. You're right. You have to make them go to interesting places and new places with new stories and new characters. And I think you're right. I think it keeps working.
I don't think they care about the portals. I think they care about where they go because then there's just that idea of where is this next portal going?
That's right. Yeah, I hope so too. So I'm glad, like, if you think that way and you're pretty smart, then I think that other kids will think that way too.
Thanks. Can you tell us about your process of writing the book and how long it took?
Well, the book, so the first thing I did was I actually read Outside Over There by Maurice Sendak a whole bunch of times. So I probably read it like 30 times. And then I just wrote like almost like a summary of the book, almost as though I'd already written it. And I used that as like a blueprint as I wrote the first draft of the book, which took me probably about a day or two. But the biggest part of writing is always the editing part. So the editing probably took me 3 or 4 months to before the book was ready to be published. And we sent it to an illustrator, and the illustrator started to work on it. But my part was, I guess, probably about 4 or 5 months, mostly of editing and making the story just perfect. Because the first draft, it doesn't take very long, but the editing takes a very long time. Because especially with a picture book, you have to make every single word just right, every single little punctuation just right. So it takes a lot of work to make sure everything's just in the exact right place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sometimes I try reading the book out loud to myself because if I read in my head, like I just pass by the word because I've writ when I've written it. But when I actually read it, one time I found a mistake where instead of shirt, it was sure.
Yeah, sometimes you know what? Sometimes as much as we try to avoid mistakes, I've found
We're
in
all
most of my
human.
books, we'll always like miss a little punctuation, or we'll miss a little typo, and it doesn't matter how big the book is or who publishes it. It's impossible to catch every single mistake, and you just have to be able to live with that.
Mm-hmm. How long did it take to publish the book?
Well, I started writing the book probably in 2020, probably, I think.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and so then it came out, I think it came out like earlier this year, right? So it came out in spring 2023. So from when I started writing it to when it got published, it was about 3 years. So sometimes like it takes that long to publish a book, not only because it takes a while to do a book, but then you have to wait for the right time to publish it. And oftentimes your publisher will have a long catalog of books they have to publish. You just kind of have to wait in line. And so I remember this book was probably ready to be published in 2022, but we had to wait till 2023 for the right season to publish it in. So a lot of it was just waiting.
Well, at least it didn't take that long.
That's true. I didn't have to wait that long.
I've met which take longer than 3 years. And I feel really sorry for those people because they shouldn't be waiting.
You know, when I started waiting, I didn't have that many gray hairs. And then when it finally got published, I had so many gray hairs. So it was kind of a long time, but it wasn't that long.
Mm-hmm. Um, what message or theme do you want readers to learn from this book?
I just think that, first of all, I want people to really appreciate Indigenous storytelling. That's really important to me. So I just want them to be able to enjoy a traditional story and appreciate where that story came from. But the story itself, I think what it's really about is it's about home. It's about like how we find our homes. It's about family, and it's about community. And I think it's also about like storytelling through song too, and how important music is in our lives. So I think all those things are the major like big themes in the book.
Mm-hmm. I have a question that I didn't really understand because um the illustrations I didn't catch them. Um with Lauren and James, which one is a boy and which one is a girl? Because and also with the illustration, which one is which? Because I get a little confused with that.
Yeah, and you know what, we were trying to Maya and I, and Maya's the illustrator.
Mm-hmm.
What we wanted to do was we wanted to write characters and draw characters that didn't really fit into a traditional idea of what a girl looks like and what a boy looks like. And so in this story, Lauren is actually the character who is taller and a little bigger, and James is the smaller kid with the longer hair. And so the idea there was just to say that not everybody looks the same. We all look different, and we all look unique, and we don't have to look a certain way if we're a boy, and we don't have to look a certain way if we're a girl. And I just we wanted to make sure that we wrote a story that honored how other people might look different, but are just people like everybody else, and are just as beautiful as anybody else.
Mm-hmm. Well, you certainly accomplished in this book, but the illustrations did puzzle me a bit.
Well,
I was
I think,
debating with myself.
yeah, I know. And sometimes with illustrations, what they're able to do is they're in stories too, they maybe just make us think a little bit, and they challenge us a little bit. And I think that's sometimes a good thing about stories.
Mm-hmm. One thing that they always make me think is who, because like the descriptions in the book, I read them, but they just go through my mind, and then I have to, like a few hundred pages later, the illustration comes up, and I'm like, who is who?
Yeah, no, I totally get it. And then sometimes when you read it more and more, you kind of get a better idea of who is who. So it takes a little while. Yeah, sometimes.
I've got a little cupboard of books, and I keep on reading them, so I've sort of like I'm actually trying to memorize them.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, I bet you can. I bet like kids have really way better memories than adults.
Well, I only think that's because adults spend all their time when they were a child learning smart things.
Yeah, we only have so much space in our heads. When we're
That's
adults,
true.
our space is all filled up.
Well, they do have space for like work and stuff, and that's good enough. They have enough to survive.
That's true. That's a really good point.
Hmm. If you could give one piece of advice to kids who are to anyone basically who's gonna write books, what would it be?
You know what I would say? I would say write about things that you're passionate for. And that doesn't mean write about things that you already know, because I feel like writing is such a exploration and it's like a journey that everybody goes on, even the writer. But if you write about things you're passionate for, I think that you get the most out of yourself. And so I always try to write about things that I'm passionate about because I feel like I get the most excited about those stories. So I would say to young writers to find things that you love and that are curious about and that you're passionate for. And those are the stories that you should spend your time with because you'll get the most out of yourself and you'll become a better writer because of it too.
Hmm. If you could travel back in time and give yourself one piece of advice, what would it be?
Oh, I would say don't worry so much about what other people think. Um, be comfortable with who you are and accept who you are and be confident that the dreams that you have are not too big for you. That's what I would tell my younger self.
Hmm. Um, and what books are you gonna write next, other than that fifth book in that series you were saying about Robertson?
Oh my gosh, I have so many books to write right now. I'm working on a comic book. I'm
Mhm.
working on the fifth book and the sixth book in the Miss Saga series. I'm working on two picture books. I'm working on three adult books. Two of them are nonfiction, one of them is fiction. I'm working on two chapter books. I just have so many that it's making my head spin.
Well, that's certainly a lot, and well, I hope you get some progress.
By the time I'm finished, you're going to be a teenager.
What?
That's true, literally.
Well, I mean, maybe it'll be published when I'm a teenager, but I'm not so sure about the writing process. I think you're gonna be pretty fast with that.
Well, we'll see. But you know what? I don't think there's anything that says that maybe you'll get published when you're a teenager. But if you don't, then don't ever give up because then if you don't get published when you're a teenager, you could get published when you're 20. So just wait and keep writing and keep working really hard.
Thank you. We've run out of questions and time. Thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure meeting you.
Nice to meet you
Um,
too. You're awesome.